Good evening, and welcome to our presentation. My name is Doug Hansen, and I'm president of the Icelandic National League of the United States. We are pleased you could join us for another of our periodic webinars, which serve to inform and educate our audience on topics related to the INLUS mission. Thank you to our members, donors, friends whose support make programs like this possible. If you are not already a member of the INLUS, please consider a membership or giving a gift membership. The price is only $25 per year for individuals and directly contributes to our programs such as webinars like this, language classes, grants, and scholarships. Before we meet our guest, I want to share a couple technical notes on the webinar format. We use the Zoom platform, which is familiar to many of us, but unlike a Zoom meeting, viewers will not be seen or heard. However, we do value and encourage your participation. You can ask questions anytime during the webinar using the Q&A button, which stands for question and answer, to type in your questions. We'll try to get to as many of your questions as we can in our available time. The webinar will also be recorded and can be viewed on the INLUS website and the INLUS YouTube channel in a few days. Now on to the presentation. We're delighted to have Aaron Kennedy back with us again. Hopefully everyone watching was able to view our July webinar where Aaron shared his experiences living and working in the Westfjords. If you missed it, you can find it on our website or YouTube channel, and I encourage you to check that out. He had some great insights and photographs that he shared with us. Aaron is an associate professor in the Department of Atmospheric Sciences at the University of North Dakota and is an avid cyclist. Last time we heard about his professional work and research. Luckily for us, he also has interesting non-work stories to share, and he's agreed to come back and join us again to talk about his cycling adventures in Iceland. Welcome back, Aaron.
Thanks for having me. Great. Well, thanks for attending. It's weird to always give like professional talks. Now I get to do a fun talk, and I actually found it to be quite challenging to put the material together because when you go biking, you just end up with stories, like so many stories. And so I'm going to keep tabs on the time, and if I start going off on too many tangents, I'll keep making sure we make progress. And so, as Doug mentioned, I'm Eric Kennedy. I visited Iceland a few times, and then I had the opportunity to live in Iceland for 8 months over the last academic year. And I just absolutely fell in love with biking across the country and doing different things. And my goal today is basically to inspire and inform. And so I want to briefly talk about my cycling history and how it led to Iceland and how I decided to like do some crazy stuff. I'm going to talk about why cycling across the country or parts of the country is just an amazing way to see and tour and vacation. And this will be the first time I'm gonna reveal my dumbest adventure yet, which is no surprise, back to Iceland in summer 2026. And so, apologies, my cat is like trying to jump up go, don't go up on the fridge. Sorry. And so through this journey, I'm going to talk about some common routes and races and different activities in Iceland for all levels. Like I want to make it clear that some of the stuff I've done is quite crazy, but it's been incremental. And so I started off as just basically wearing a pair of gym shorts and biking, and it's worked up to Iceland. And there's ways that you can bike in Iceland that don't have really high barriers and are quite safe. I'm going to talk about cycling resources, and so ways that you can plan your own cycling trips. There's a lot of great resources out there. And then some logistics about cycling in Iceland and being prepared because it is a very, can be an extreme environment. And so this is my cycling history. As many of us, bikes were our main form of transportation as kids. It was also the main vector for ER visits. So sorry, parents, but yeah, stitches and staples, and that's all things that happen from biking. And then this horrible thing happened. I got my driver's license, and I sort of lost my way for a while. And so the dark ages were until my like late 20s. And then something crazy happened in grad school. I was like really like into my studies, and I needed to get like more outdoor activities in just to like keep my sanity. And then something horrible happened. I tore my ACL playing softball, and the doctor said, "Hey, here's the percentage chance that you're going to re-tear it. the best thing you can do are activities that will strengthen your knee. And guess what? Biking is one of those. And I thought, hmm, that's a good idea. I should get back on the bike. And around the same time, I got really tired of the parking police on our campus. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to just start bike commuting. And that means some extreme things in North Dakota when it's like minus 30, Fahrenheit in the winter. And so I started off just embracing biking again. When I first biked in the winter, I'm like literally wearing jeans with maybe like a base layer underneath. And over the years, I just sort of learned how to adapt and cope with the weather in North Dakota. I also started doing races, and so I wanted to challenge myself. And the great thing about local races is the community is very welcoming, like many bike communities are. And it was just a way for me to like push myself and meet other cyclists. And then in the 2010s, I was basically finishing up my graduate work. I was becoming a faculty member at University of North Dakota. And being like an early career faculty member with the stresses like trying to get funding and support students stuff can be very stressful. And my mind is just always spinning. Like I'm a scientist, I can't shut it off. And I have this affliction where the only way I can like mentally recuperate is by like physically destroying myself. And so I ended up just getting on the bike even more and just that became my hobby. The other thing that was happening at this time was the family was growing. Um, got the kids involved, and so we started doing like these little bike trips where the kids would hop on this WeHo thing, and we'd do like an overnight, go camping, and do fun stuff. And I kind of expanded my racing interests. I still love like gravel riding and racing. Like I love the scenic routes. I'm not about going fast. I'm about just like seeing things and having fun. And then I got into fat bikes. So these are like bikes with like really wide tires that we use for like riding on snow or just riding over dumb terrain. And then I like the culmination of this sort of phase was there's this race at the time it's called Dirty Kansas. It was like this 200-mile gravel race in Kansas. And I first started off by doing like a 100-mile race version of it. And then eventually I did a 200-mile race just to basically see can I do it? And the answer is yeah, I could do it. And then I was like physically destroyed for like a month afterwards. And so I was like, I was proud of myself. I was like, maybe I need to do some other things with the bike. But in the course of doing these races, just kind of coming full circle, is I met a future riding buddy in Iceland during a race in the Badlands, North Dakota on the Mahahay Trail. And so as I got into the 2020s, so this is like the last 5, 6 years or so, work life was still crazy. I'm becoming more of like an administrator now, for better or worse. 3 kids, that's even more crazy. And I didn't really have a lot of time to do like training for like races and stuff like that. But I could tuck in bike trips here and there. Like a lot of times I'd have a work trip and I'd be like, well, if I extend my stay a couple days, I could do some biking somewhere. And that made it affordable when you've got a growing family. And when you're on your own sort of time constraints, you're not so worried about the training. You can just go out and ride and have fun. And the other thing that I realized was some of these races were getting like really expensive. And I was like, if I'm going to like dedicate money to doing these races, what if I put that money towards like doing an adventure instead? And so I sort of scaled back these larger races I was doing. I still do local races, but then I started doing these like bike packing trips where I throw my camping gear on the bike and I just start riding. And so I rode part of the Arizona Trail. So I basically started at the Mexican border, went up to Tucson, and then I gave a science presentation at the University of Arizona. So it was like part of these work trips. And then during the COVID era, everyone's cooped up. I can say as like a professor trying to teach in that era was a pain in the butt, and especially when you got kids trying to learn too. And so my escape was I rode across North Dakota, and so that took 4 days. And what I found was you just get these really random experiences when you're out traveling, and it's just amazing. You meet people, you may never meet them again, but you come up with a story from it, and it's great. And I had this dream of like, what if I rode internationally? I didn't know where. I'd been just sort of looking at stuff online, but I did end up visiting Iceland, basically to see a volcano, fell in love with the place, and that basically just spiraled into why I'm giving this talk today. And so the first trip I did in Iceland was actually one of these opportunities where I was able to combine work and play. And so I had a conference in Iceland. We're talking about like winter weather, and I was able to put a week on the front of it And so basically my airfare was covered. All I had to do is get myself up to some place to bike. And I wanted to do something that I thought was approachable. Like I didn't know how biking would go in a foreign country. Like I had been in Iceland only a couple days prior to this, like from a previous trip, and so I had really no clue how this was going to go. But I thought I'd try and like set myself up to succeed. And so around this time, I saw this route profile on bikepacking.com. They said it's called the Westfjords Way, and it's this like route around Westfjords. Every single picture is just like, wow, that's not North Dakota. That looks amazing. I need a ride there. And at the same time, there was a group called Cycling Westfjords in this area that was like promoting tourism, and they had resources that said, "Hey, just check in, like register with us, and we'll keep tabs on you and like make sure nothing bad happens." And they would, give you updates if like bad weather or whatever is coming in. I thought, that's a good idea. If I'm going to go ride somewhere foreign, it's good to have like some sort of support system. And I thought this would be a great area to bike. And so this area, I should have put a bigger map in here, but Westfjords is up in the northwest corner of Iceland. It's sort of off the beaten path. It's off the ring road, which is like the primary road in Iceland where everyone does tourism. And so Westfjords tends to be like a quieter place, not a lot of traffic. Um, and while I was out here biking, I was actually looking into areas I could potentially do research. I was like, I do winter weather research, and this area is prone to avalanches. And I had learned from my friend in Iceland that they get a lot of blowing snow that I was studying. And this was an opportunity for me to actually like see what this terrain looks like. Is this a place I could potentially work and study? And to make a long story short, I found that it was, and that's how I ended up living there for last year. The other thing I wanted to like get out of this trip was I've just heard all these stories about F roads, which are sort of like the crazy off-road gravel or worse roads across Iceland. And that just said fat bike all over it. And I thought, I want to start riding some of these and see what it's like. But I'm not just going to go out in the middle of nowhere and get myself in trouble. Maybe I'll do this in a more manageable way. And Westfjords has a couple of these F roads. There's one of them right here. And this was a first foray into like the more exposed areas of Iceland to see if I thought I could like cope and handle that type of terrain. One of the things that, as a meteorologist, I realized, and just knowing a bit about Iceland, was any plan can get derailed by the weather. And so I tried to set myself up to succeed. I gave myself like an extra day and a half or so to basically complete this loop in case the weather would be bad. And guess what? The weather did get bad while I was out there. And so what I did is like the first day I landed, I biked this stretch, which is pretty flat. There's some hills. Ironically, there was more climbing on this first day than like my entire trip across North Dakota, which was a bit of a wake-up call, but it was mostly pavement. There were stops along the way that you could go to cafes and stuff. And it was just a good sort of introductory day on the bike. And then the following day, I knew the weather would be good. And when I'm up in an exposed area elevation, that the weather wasn't going to be a problem. And then as I basically continued on this trip, that's when the weather got bad. And so I broke down the sort of the elevation profile here. You're starting at sea level, you're climbing up to about 1,500 to 2,000 feet, depending on the mountain pass. The first 2 days were great. I actually got a little bit of sunburn. Like I brought sunscreen, but I didn't apply it frequently enough. And then as the third day came in, it's like the weather just got progressively worse all day. And so I'll talk more about the gear later, but you got to be prepared for rain and wind and everything combined. And there was like one point where I was climbing a hill into a 40-mile-per-hour wind with the rain. So I was literally climbing. I wasn't biking. I was walking my bike up a mountain, and I'm sure people in cars driving by were like, "Who is this idiot?" And so then, and there was another day of a little bit better weather. And then I got up to this area, and you'll see it jumps from day 4 to day 6. And that's because I was stuck in a town with some other people that I ran into for a day because there was a yellow alert, which is like one of the bad type of weather events. And it was not safe to really be out biking with the winds and the rain. And so I was glad I had a day built in. And then the final day was perhaps one of the coldest days I've ever had on the bike, where it was almost snowing on the mountain passes, and then I had to descend into town and then get ready to get on the plane to go back home later in the day. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to step through some pictures of this first trip. What's interesting is Iceland makes it pretty easy to get there and around on bicycle. And so, for me personally, I invested in like a suitcase I can put my bicycle in. Basically, you take the wheels off, you take the handlebars off, and it fits in this bag. And then I have a friend in Reykjavik where I was able to build the bike up. And then the cool thing is if you fly domestically in Reykjavik, there's an airport in Westfjords, there's two other main airports across other areas of Iceland. You can fly your bicycle completely built, which is a game changer. That makes it so easy to just sort of get around the country. And I got a kick out of them, like rolling my bike out on the tarmac and just like lifting it up and putting it in the cargo hold of the plane. I thought that was pretty cool. The other thing is flying domestically in Iceland is like taking this step back in time. There is no security. People don't really show up until about like 20 minutes before the plane leaves. And so I was like, I better get to the airport like an hour early. And I was just basically sitting here by myself for a while. And it's like, is this plane even coming? It did. Everything worked out. It was just like, I don't know, going way back in time in terms of flying. And so I'd like to just sort of advertise Westfjords as this like perfect place for multi-day trips in Iceland. In Ísafjörður, which is like sort of the capital area, that's where you fly into. There's a full service bike shop. It's called Fjord Hub. Tyler is a buddy of mine, runs it. They have rental bikes, so you don't even have to basically bring a bike with you. You could rent one there. They have supplies. They provide supported tour options. They run some races I'll talk about later. That's great. Like you have a resource in the area uh, to help you out with cycling, and it's a type of shop where like if you're riding around Westfjords and something critically goes wrong with your bike, you can call them up and they will come get you. It may take a few hours, but they'll come get you. The other thing about Westfjords that is nice is most of the main roads are now paved, even more so than when I biked several years ago. As I mentioned, there's not a lot of traffic. The other thing that's great is there's towns or lodging pretty much every day when you're out biking and campgrounds. And so if you like camping, you've got the ability to do so. And these campgrounds in Iceland are pretty legit. They tend to have like heated toilets, showers. You show up and someone's all of a sudden there with a credit card reader, like, oh, I need my, $10 roughly US to for you to camp here, and it works out. On the flip side, if you're like, I don't really like camping, all of these towns typically have little like motel, guest houses. There's Airbnbs. There's places you could basically pay for to live the good life in a nice warm bed every night. The other thing that's really cool about Westfjords are these hot pots, which are geothermal pools scattered throughout the area. And so you get done biking, and you're like, that just killed me. Guess what? Here's 100-degree water to climb in and recuperate, which is great. Amazing scenery. It's sort of like miniature Norway. You got these fjords. There's sometimes snow on top of the mountains. Sometimes there isn't. You either have a headwind or tailwind in these fjords, but it's usually manageable unless there's like a storm coming in. If you want to get off the the more established roads, there's these gravel and off-road excursions that you can get in some more off-road miles. And the other amazing thing about Iceland is there's just endless fresh water everywhere. Like, unless there's like a sheep standing in the water source, you can drink anything. There's no bacteria. There's nothing that's going to bother you. And this water is like literally the cleanest on the planet. I don't think I'll ever have better tasting water. And so I would carry like on this trip 2 bottles. And if I got thirsty, I'd like pull off the side of the road, fill up the water bottle in a waterfall, and then keep on going, which is amazing. Like if you're in warm climates, a lot of times you worry about like how much water do I need to bring? Am I going to run out? That's really a non-issue in West Fjords. So here's just a few other images in West Fjords. One of the interesting things are these tunnels that go through areas, and so there's mountain passes. If the weather's sketchy, you could skip the mountain pass, take the tunnel instead. And some of these tunnels are like 5 kilometers long, so you're riding underground for like 3 miles, but most of them are well lit. And I've never felt like I was in danger in them. There's so little traffic that it's really not a big deal. This picture here, this is a geothermal pool right on the ocean. And so you basically can go in the geothermal pool, and then in my case, this German mom and daughter dared me to get in the water with them afterwards. And then I managed to like cramp up every muscle in my body. Afterwards, they invited me to their camp and for beer and German food, so it worked out okay. But these are the little experiences you have when you're out biking that you don't normally get if you're just driving around everywhere. This is an example of being up on one of the mountain passes. You're basically going in and out of these mountains and descending in the towns. This is one of the gravel roads descending down to one of the most famous waterfalls in Westfjords. Unfortunately, by next year, I think this is going to be completely paved, which is kind of sad, but it'll be, I guess, better for tourism. And then the nice thing about Iceland, there's all these little quaint, like tourist attractions. I got down to the bottom of this hill up here, and here's this sign, "Beware of sea monsters." I'm like, what the heck is this? Well, there's a sea monster museum in Iceland. And you know darn well I'm going to stop at that. And so I rode into town. I needed to get food anyway. And I'm like, I'm going to go check out the sea monster museum. And I walk in there. I'm like the only person in there. And the lady's like, do you know about the Icelandic sea monsters? I'm like, nope, but I want to know more. And so I spent like a half hour there learning about the supposed sea monsters of the area. Now I'm well rested. I can start biking again after that excursion. Westfjords is great for staying fueled. There's a lot of like I would say elegant food solutions out there. Most of the towns they love pizza in Iceland, and so you can get pizza. They love their waffles and like sort of Icelandic pancakes and waffles. And so these two upper pictures, this is a small little. It's basically a house called Litlebear, which is the ceilings are like 6 feet tall. But you go in there then you basically just you eat and you dine and you keep on biking. There was another place called Heiðarleir, which is like a famous like ranch in Iceland where you can go like equestrian riding or camping or whatever. Amazing food. Like this was like a cured lamb, sort of almost like lamb jerky. And it came with this like fruit sauce stuff and melon balls and cherries and honestly, probably some of the best food I've ever had in the country. And here it is like in the random like middle of nowhere of the countryside. As I mentioned, you get always weird experiences and fun experiences while you're biking across areas. On this trip, I ran into these four Scottish ladies. They basically were faster than me. However, they had less tolerance for bad weather, and so I caught up to them. And then we basically just went back leapfrogged for a couple days. And then when I rolled into town, I was quite cold, and they saw me. They were walking to Bonus, which was one of the grocery stores, and he said, "Hey, we still have our hotel room. You want a warm shower?" Heck yes. And so I was like one of these serendipitous experiences where things just sort of work out. The other amazing thing about Iceland is there's a lot of art and like investment in the arts. And so when I was stuck in a town, like what are you going to do all day when you're stuck in a town? Well, I started walking around and here's this like art installation, this old like fish house. And it was this very emotional photographic journey about this story about this family. They lost a father from like a fishing boat accident, and then later on, there's a child born with Down syndrome, and it walks through this whole story. And I just thought, like, wow, if I didn't happen to stop in this town because of the weather, I never would have heard about this story and seen this art. And I just came away just really moved by it. Bottom here, this is a picture of just having beer at the Germans campground. I was actually camped farther away, but I just had a little tent. And then here's all of us. There's like five of us on this plane going back to Reykjavik, and somehow they fit all of our bikes in the cargo hold, and it all worked out, so which is great. And so, as I mentioned, Icelandic weather can be crazy. If you bike in Iceland, you're going to have bad weather at some point if you're biking more than a day or two. There was a day I just had to cut it short because it wasn't safe. I was like going down this mountain. I was going downhill on roughly 10% grade, and I only could do 10 miles per hour because the wind was so crazy. And so Iceland, the Icelandic Met Office has this alert system. They use colors to indicate the type of weather. Typically, once it gets the yellow alert, that's where you need to start paying attention, and that usually means lots of wind during the summer. As you get to the more transitional seasons, like the either earlier in the spring or later in the fall, that can also mean like a lot of snow and rain and landslides and stuff. And so, yellow alert is like you better watch out, and typically you probably don't want to be out on a bike in it. If you get to orange or red, no, you don't leave town. You stay safe. So after this trip, went back to Reykjavik. Really great place to bike. There's a lot of bike infrastructure, these dedicated trails that basically loop around the whole city. There's a lot of places, a lot of services in the capital that can let like rent bikes to you if you just happen to be traveling in Iceland and you want to just get a day of biking in. There's a lot of nice signposting for the cycling routes, so you should still have like a phone or something on you to get around. But as long generally, if you just follow the coastline, you're not going to get too lost. And what's interesting is like this loop around the city is roughly about like 15 to 20 miles, which is like for me sort of like the typical like bike trip or like bike daily bike route I would do like around my town. Just there's a lot more people in this area and a lot more like cool things to see. Um, One thing I'll point out is Iceland is an extremely safe country. Like when I lived in Iceland, there's people with like thousands of dollars bicycles just sitting outside like forever and they don't go anywhere. Would not do that in Reykjavik. In Reykjavik, there are a few shady customers, not the Icelandic people. It tends to be folks that come in from Europe, and then there has been instances where people like stolen a bike and they basically get it on a ship, and then you're never going to see it again. And so, in the capital is like the one area you'd probably lock up your bike if you're like away from it for more than a couple minutes. But other than that, Iceland's a amazingly safe place. And so during that trip, I encountered weather. My friend that I met in the Madehay, Steve McGuire, that same year, he rode north-south across Iceland, across the highlands, and he ended up encountering one of the worst summer windstorms in like summer history in Iceland. And they ended up basically stuck in a hut for over a day and a half in like hurricane force winds. And he mentioned that to get water, he was like literally crawling on the ground to get water because you couldn't stand up in it. And so we ended up chatting over Zoom about our trips. And he said, you know what? I'm going back to Iceland. I'm going to travel across Iceland east-west in 2023. Do you want to come with? We're going to go across the highlands. And I thought, well, that sounds amazing. But like, first of all, am I like prepared for it? What if something goes wrong? And he said, hey, it's going to be okay. We're going to have some like support to like guide us through there. And so you should think about it. And so I ended up doing this trip with them, and I'll talk about that in a second. But if you venture away from the coast, this is where like the type of bikes and the equipment you need kind of goes up a notch. At a minimum, in the Highlands, you probably need like mountain bikes or like road bikes that have like clearance for really wide tires, like 2 inches minimum, just because the roads are beat to heck. It's perfect for fat bikes, like 4 inch tires. There's all sorts of lava out there. I'll show you pictures, but that just gives you a lot of comfort on the bike, and that's really what you need to succeed for multi-day trips is just being comfortable. And then the other thing is there's minimal people out there, there's minimal services, there's maximum exposure. So you need to be able to support yourself and get yourself out of trouble if something bad happens, or at least have a plan for if something bad happens, how you're going to get out of there. And this is an example of a satellite photo after Steve did his trip. This is red line. This is roughly this path they took between two of these glaciers. And this area, this glacier on the right, that's all dust that blew up from this windstorm. So pretty crazy. So we did this expedition across Iceland. He had this goal to start at basically the easternmost road in Dalatangi, and then basically riding west across Iceland and ending up in Laxalberg, which is the westernmost point in Europe. That's where all the puffins are. So if you want to see puffins, that's where you go. He ended up having some friends and buddies that like 4x4ing, and so they're basically sort of shadowing us. He has this whole class where they build bikes at University of Iowa, and he built this bike specifically for his route. And so they're shooting a film about taking stuff from the classroom and bringing it to like the real world and like seeing if it works. And so we had this support roughly daily where if something would go wrong or we needed supplies, it was possible to get it. One thing I want to point out is there's a famous Icelandic US photographer, Chris Burkhardt. He's like the premier photo adventure crazy guy in Iceland, and he did this route first. So we weren't the first ones to do this. He did. Although I think we may have been the first people to do this actually on single speed fat bikes. And so that was one of the unique things we decided to do. Well, Steve was always that single speeder. I was, I guess, single speed curious, but if you don't have gears, there's a lot less stuff that can break on your bike. You just bring a spare chain. And I thought, for the Highlands, that's not a bad idea, having a bike that it'd be very hard to break. And so we rode single speed bikes. I joined from basically the eastern coast up to Westfjords, and I had some other stuff going on. And so I did like I would call the meat and potatoes of the route. And then I rode most of this area in Westfjords area earlier. So I skipped out on that. And then we stayed in a lot of huts. I'll show you examples of these huts across the country, but they're like basically structures that you can go in that have protection from the elements. And then there's a couple places where we camped. And so for the recording later on, if you scan this QR code, there's a short film that they shot covering our trip. A lot of great scenery in there. And then Chris Burkhart's always up to crazy adventures, and he just made a new film about basically traveling the south coast of Iceland. So I encourage you to check that out. I think it's like 20 minutes long or something. So what happened? I flew into Iceland and then got picked up from the airport. We immediately drove across the country, which is a heck of a drive. It's like probably 7, 8 hours minimum. Went to sleep, then woke up and started riding. And then we had one of our longest mileage days. It was like 80 miles. And that was probably too much. And so the lesson is if you're going to bike in Iceland, try and just take like one day to recuperate a bit before you like start doing dumb stuff. I know after the first day, I felt one, wow, this trip was already worth it because the first day was just so crazy. But second of all, I really should have had more time to acclimate. Like we ended up basically being on the bikes for roughly like 12 hours, and that was a mix of pedaling and then these giant climbs, which I think to date is like one of the largest, like highest climb I've ever done. And that was on the single speed bicycle. That means you're walking it up. So there's a lot of hiking, and there's two of those, and so that was pretty brutal. The day started out okay. We were riding along these trails, very scenic. This is like an old World War II landing craft. And then the day got progressively worse. You can see it's almost depressing. Like you see the clouds and the rain coming in. You're like, well, looks like Iceland's going to be Iceland. And we basically climbed into the fog. And then luckily we eventually got out of the fog and there was just a bit of rain. And then I think we finally got to the hut we were staying in. Like it was after 11 o'clock at night. Like I was destroyed. And then after that, we were in the highlands, and you're basically riding along a rift zone. Iceland is very geologically active. There's volcanoes. They're not all dormant. Like some of the stuff is like happening in real time. And so you have to be cognizant of like, is anything crazy happening? And always have a backup plan, I guess, if like a volcano decides to go. But it's fairly rare. And the only active volcano right now is down by the airport, actually. So it's not a big deal. But the geologic history and the amount of volcanoes makes riding across the highlands extremely interesting. Like as an earth scientist, I'm mainly focused on the sky, but I was just intrigued by what was happening on the ground. Afterwards, I would go back like, well, what was this that we climbed, and what was that? And basically, everything was some sort of volcano at some point in time. And so we went across this like Louisville Plain, which could be a river at times, or dry during like the summer. And then you can see this vent from an eruption in 2014 from Hallorún, which was one of the largest eruptions in recent times in Iceland. And then we are outside an active volcano called Askja, which has like a crater lake. And then here's like all the previous ash and sand. And so this is why you need fat bikes, because like that would be a pain on skinny tires. And then there was a part where we couldn't ride because the rocks were too chunky. It turned out that was actually an old shield volcano, and we got to the top and like, oh, here's a big crater. Well, that's cool. But around some of the more like volcanically active areas, there are these F roads. They are trafficked by vehicles fairly rarely, but they're at least like maintained. Like I don't know if they come with the grader or something, but there's actually like a route that you can see and stick to. But the train tends to be quite slow. The other thing in the highlands is there's a lot of water crossings, and the water levels are dependent on the weather and the time of day. Um, Getting across these for the deeper streams, you really want to be doing this in probably at least like a group. So if something goes wrong, you got someone there to save your butt. We crossed some of these barefoot, others in like closed keen water sandals, neoprene socks. One of the most important things is learning how to read the water levels. Like if you know how to read the water levels, like a lot of these rivers are actually quite shallow, like only go up to like your ankles or maybe like your calf, and so they're really not that bad. But then you get across the water, and then oh, there's mud and quicksand and stuff, and so you have to like watch out for that stuff too. But it was just amazing terrain, just with like these winding rivers and very cold water. On a slide earlier, so I sank my phone in one of these, never to be seen again. That was kind of funny. It was actually funny because in my away message for my work, I said, "You're not gonna be able to contact me." And then when I lost my phone, I was like, you know what? No one can contact me, and it was freeing. Like I felt like I was like released from the world or something. And then Steve, who's up here in the blue, he gave me his phone. He's like, "I trust you. You're not gonna lose it." I knew how to navigate with the GPS software on the phone, and so I kept us safe the rest of the way. There's these nice huts on the highlands. There are various quality. Uh, some are emergency shelters, or basically first come, first serve. Essentially, there'll be a QR code in there if you want to donate some money to the Icelandic Search and Rescue. Others can be rented and more elaborate. Some of them are more like group homes, or there's like a bunch of people sleeping in there, whether they're camping or biking or whatever. I got a couple links in here that you can check out later on to see what these look like. But they're various different scales of like how many people they can hold, what sort of services they offer. This one down here, Gestuthet, this is like in the middle of nowhere, like literally the middle of nowhere, up against the glacier. Had the most scenic outhouse in the world. They did have water stored there. There was some emergency snacks, but that was about it. Actually, it had a stove too, and with some propane that they replaced once in a while, which was a pleasant surprise. But you basically get there, you have to open it up, take care of it. You know, it's like leave no trace. You respect it. Log books in there that you can read with all sorts of amazing stories of people that, you know, this place saved their butt because they got stuck in a storm or whatever. Dreki, this is the one outside Askia. Like this is the active volcano right behind it. This one had like showers and some electricity, and then there's like a ranger station stuff. So that was a lot more elaborate. At the more elaborate ones, you'll see like sometimes like tourist groups and stuff. They're out there doing stuff. And some of them have like geothermal pools, which is amazing. Just good stuff. So some more highlights. Another example of geothermal pool, lava wasteland that we're crossing. There's actually surprisingly good signage across the highlands. Like anytime you're at like a major like road intersection, there's signs there in various states of painting, but they're sort of embossed so you can like tell where the heck you're going. On the edge of the highlands, there's these wetlands, and that's where you got to watch out because these midge flies, and they will swarm you. I found that the net just sort of bugged me, and so I just didn't stop riding too much. But they can, most of them don't bite, but they get in your eyes. That's really the worst thing. And then apparently, over the like the biggest news in the last month is apparently they have mosquitoes in Iceland now, and we didn't see them in the highlands, and hopefully they're not in the highlands. But I guess watch out in the future. And so here's what I'm planning for next year in collaboration with Steve from University of Iowa. Uh, there's a solar eclipse happening in August, and the goal is bike across Iceland to see the solar eclipse. It's going to be somewhat unique in that when I lived in Iceland, my oldest daughter came with, and she wants to see her friends again. And so when I land in Iceland, I'm going to get her up to Westfjords so she can crash with her friends while then I do this really dumb adventure across Iceland. And I had some like goals, like I wanted to ride some of this area. This is where Askia is, and the pictures you saw. I wanted to ride through that again, but I wanted to see some more like touristy, like waterfalls and stuff along the way. So there's a famous canyon, this one down here. We're gonna camp there, and then the group from Iowa is gonna come in from Ackett, and then the goal is we're gonna meet up on the same day at the Kishtifet hut if everything goes well. We'll find out. Maybe I need to do an update after this trip is over. But then I want to see the Southern Highlands, and so we're going to go down here. This is a very famous hiking area for Iceland. Very beautiful. It's a really elaborate campground there. All sorts of trails, and so we're going to kind of loop around that. And that'll take probably a week to get there, and then maybe 4 to 5 days with some buffer to go around the Southern Highlands, and then get Kveðsvölla, which is going to be my resupply spot. Then it'll be roughly another week or so from here up to Westfjords. And I wanted to take the ferry. There's a ferry that runs across here from the Snæfellsnes Peninsula. I thought that would be neat. And so I'll bike some of this stuff. I've actually driven some of these roads. It'll be cool to bike them. I mean, when I was driving out there, I thought, oh, these are great gravel roads. I want to bike on this someday. So I'll do some of that. There's this famous waterfall in this area called Hauifoss, so I'm going to do that. These are places where normally you can't get to them with like a normal car because the roads are just beat the heck. And so the bicycle is actually one of the easiest ways to get there, other than having to expend your energy to get there. But the fun part is we're going to meet up with Steve and his gang, this group from Iceland. He's got this class, they're building bicycles. He's got two students that are actually building bicycles that they're going to ride on this route, which is amazing. So it's like coming this full circle where you're building a bicycle for a purpose and you're going to execute it. Um, they're going to have, I think, a support vehicle for that. But my goal is to basically try and do this completely unsupported, maybe if anything, I might stash some stuff in their vehicle for the Southern Highlands in case things get kind of crazy here for weather. But want to try to do this without with any support. The fun part is the students are also designing some engineering packages, and so for the solar eclipse, we're actually going to launch a weather balloon. So I always got to like incorporate work somehow. So we're like biking to this point where we can launch a weather balloon with the camera package, but that's a side task of this trip. So how do you plan trips in Iceland? The best number one best resource is this website, cyclingiceland.is. It's this individual that has compiled this amazing map with like basically everything in Iceland. And everything is color coded. That is huge. The legend is huge, but basically every town has this little like it looks like a Trivia Pursuit wheel where the colors denote different amount of services, and it's extremely accurate. Like everywhere I've been, it's like been on the money for like what's available. And so if you're planning trips, you can say, well, I don't want to camp. I'm going to find towns where there's like lodging, and you could look for that color and then plan out stuff occasionally. If you like bikepacking, bikepacking.com has a couple different routes. They have this north-south divide route. They have the Westfjords Way, and there's this Fallabak one down here. And so those have tons of information about like where you camp, where to get water, and other logistical things to think about. And there's just tons of people that have biked in Iceland at some point, and it's just fun like reading their trip reports to see how their experience went. When should you go to Iceland? I just leave this chart on here. This is from epic-iceland.net, but basically shows what sort of stuff do you like? When should you ride? If we focus on the biking, generally we want to focus on periods when we don't have a lot of alerts. And so that's going to be anywhere from like April to September. But honestly, if you want the best weather, it's more like probably June to August, with July and August being really like the best balance of everything. Not to say they can have storms there. And if you're doing the Highlands, like literally July and August and maybe September, the only times you can go there because some of these roads they just close down and you're not even allowed on them. The Iceland landscape is very delicate, and if it's like super wet, you can actually damage it for like the foreseeable future, and you want to avoid doing that. Getting bikes to and around Iceland. I mentioned how I got my bike like domestically across Iceland, but there's buses that you can load your bikes on. You can fly. If you're really adventurous, when you fly into the Keflavik Airport, which is the international airport, there's this bike pit. It's a container where you have everything you need to build your bicycle. And there's actually places at the airport where you basically pay a fee and they'll store your bike suitcase or bag. And so if you wanted to, you could actually start your bike trip from the airport. Although to be honest, that part of Iceland is quite brutal in terms of weather. And there's just a lot of traffic between there and the capital, and that doesn't seem very fun. And so I don't know if I'd recommend doing that. I'd rather take the bus into Reykjavik and then start your journey there at some point, or take a bus to wherever you're going to go. Do your research on the airline policies. Like, there's pretty affordable airfare to Iceland during the summer. It's probably gonna be somewhere around like $500-600 round trip. However, Iceland Air, I think, is about $115 per leg to travel with your bike. Since I'm in the Minneapolis area, Delta's a major hub, and they do fly it to Iceland during the summer. And they actually have a policy where if you can keep your bag at exactly 50 pounds, which is what I found I can do with my fat bike, it basically counts as a normal bag. And then if you have any sort of status, you can fly for free. So you can actually work the system to get there pretty affordably. Um, I think that the key thing is it's very easy to pull off a bike trip in Iceland without requiring any sort of rental vehicle. If you know how to build up your own bike, that makes it easiest, but there are services in the capital where you could take it to a shop and someone could like build it up for you. Practical logistics, communication is not an issue in the country. Pretty much everyone knows English. I think in my cycling travels, I only ran across maybe one or two senior citizens who only knew Icelandic, but we figured it out. It all worked out, and we laughed about it afterwards. It's a largely or almost completely cashless society. Between the multiple bike trips, living in Iceland for 8 months, I've never used cash, but you do need MasterCard or Visa. American Express Discovery is rarely accepted. And then since you're going to use a card, make sure you don't have any international fees. Even campgrounds have readers. I think I mentioned that. And then Iceland has surprisingly good cell service, especially along the coasts. Even in the highlands, there's areas that we were getting cell service, which was just sort of mind-boggling to me. And then if you are interested in like booking lodging, booking.com is extremely common in Iceland, also Airbnb. The most affordable type of lodging are these shared guest houses where you have a private bedroom, but you have like shared living and bath areas. Quite economical, like less than $100 a night in some cases. Um, a nice thing is you meet other people and then you talk stories and then you come away with more memories. Prices will be highest along the ring road. So if you get away from the ring road, that's when things will be more affordable. It's important to stay safe in Iceland. I would consider using a GPS tracking service, one, just so your friends can see where the heck you are and see what's going on. If you have like only spot devices, there's ways to send SOS messages. We'll see if these continue to get used in the future because now cell phones have like satellite messaging on them too. I might try and use that next year. I'll have both just in case. The other thing is you can register your travel with safetrvel.is, which is run by ISAR, the Icelandic Search and Rescue. And so if you're going in areas away from like society, send them a route. And what will happen is ISAR is completely volunteer run, and basically these people are out having their own adventure, checking on people. And if they know there's people out in certain areas, they'll actually drive out there and just to see check in on people, see what you're doing. As I mentioned, keep tabs on the weather, be aware of crazy winds. That's really probably the biggest risk, other than like hypothermia from like rain and snow and stuff. There's a really nice website for checking the road conditions, that tells you a lot about like what the roads will be like, what you may be riding on. And then, of course, follow the rules of the road. In Iceland, you'll probably be riding in the summer, which there is a dot of daylight, but if it's darker in the tunnels, you need to have lights or strobes or something just so people can see you. As I mentioned, the country's incredibly safe. It's common to see nice bikes left outside. When you're out bike packing, I don't think I've ever had a concern about anything like disappearing. Just look out in Reykjavik. And then there was a theft ring along the Golden Circle, which is sort of like a little tourism area just east of the capital, where there is these bands of people like distracting people and stealing stuff. And so, other than that, it's pretty safe. Staying fueled, expect small grocery C stores in the middle of nowhere. Well, not in the middle of nowhere, but in the towns in the middle of nowhere. The nice thing is they post the hours that they're open, like right on the signs, which is amazing. So like this bonus, which is like the low cost store in Iceland, it's open from 10 to 20. So 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. That's typical in Iceland. They don't get up early and the stores don't stay open that late. And so make your stops accordingly. Eating out is expensive in Iceland, but there's no tipping. If you're gonna like save money, eating out is like during lunch. So if you're gonna get a big meal, do it over lunch because it tends to be like there's specials where you get like a drink for free or whatever. Dinner's gonna be full price. Other things, meat's expensive, breakfast is minimal, carbs are plentiful. They love their carbs. The bakeries and coffee are amazing. It's a very westernized diet, but there's more fish and lamb. And personally, I find their sweets, the carbs to be delicious. Their hot dogs are delicious. Their rye bread's delicious. Their butter's delicious. Throw in some like summer sausage or something. You can't import any meat in the country, so you got to get it locally. And you've got all the ingredients for being properly fueled during your bike ride. So I'm running pretty long here, so I'm going to wrap things up here in the next 5 minutes or so. I just thought I'd kind of go over like what sort of like bike clothing and gear I use. The caveat here is I'm from North Dakota. I'm quite warm-blooded, and so I probably dress more minimally compared to some folks. And generally like, you want to be prepared for temperatures between about 30 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and most of the temperatures are going to be between like 45 to 60. It's going to be coolest during the day near the coast because it's moderated by the water. It's gonna be warmer inland. It can get surprisingly warm, like over the lava wastelands where you got this like really dark soil, but they could get pretty chilly at night. And so think of almost like the highlands are basically like a desert, so kind of a desert climate. The absolute number one thing you need are high quality rain jacket and pants, so shells. They got to have tape seams. You want to make sure they're weatherproof. If you have a rain jacket that's got a hood that fits a helmet, that's a huge plus. That goes a long way to like keeping your head warm, which is like one of the primary areas you lose heat. And the nice thing is if you have these really nice rain jackets and pants, They also work as like a wind barrier. And so if it gets really cold out, I would throw them on to stay warm if I have like base layers underneath. So my typical outfit, I'd have like liner bibs, just my own personal preference. Either shorts or wind resistant pants, depending on how warm it is. Either short or long sleeve base layer, depending on how warm it is. And then once again, based off the temperature, either like a vest. So you can see me wearing a vest in this picture. It's got a little bit of insulation in the front. It's just sort of like a performance fleece on the back that's very breathable. Uh, you do want sun protection because the sun will be out almost the entire day. Like in July is the land of midnight sun, and you get a lot of sun exposure. And so UPF 50 long sleeve layers are I found them to be really clutch. Wool socks, no matter what. Like that's the one thing I would never change up unless you're like walking through water. You need neoprene socks, but the wool socks are great. For footwear, anything with like Gore-Tex to protect you from the rain. I actually, since I ride single speed, I wear platform pedals, platform shoes, so I don't clip in. But if you're going to have a clip-in shoe or a platform shoe, get something that's Gore-Tex that's like rainproof. That helps a lot. And then if you still get wet, you can always do like the plastic bag trick to keep your socks dry. For the water crossings, up here in the right here, neoprene sock with closed toe sandal really worked out great. There's one day we had so many water crossings, I just wore that the whole day. And even though it was like 50 degrees or something, and the glacial water was like barely above freezing, I was plenty warm. And then what I do is I just have them like dangling off the side of the bicycles. They can dry out over time. A lot of accessories, a skull cap or headband, thermal beanie, all really nice things to have. All the different types of gloves, light gloves, warm gloves, rain, windproof gloves. I end up using like all of them during the trip. I really love these shower pass gloves that have like a barrier in it that keep your hands dry. Unless it's like close to the freezing mark, these worked really well. Knee warmers were great for keeping my legs warm. A net gaiter for keeping the net warm and keeping sun off your neck. But also you can pull it up and keep dust out of your eyes if there's like blowing dust and rocks and stuff. And then full coverage sunglasses because with wind there'll be stuff blowing around and you want to protect your eyes. So just this example of my Highlands bike. Basically, I went with panniers in the back. I had all my camping stuff back here. On the handlebars, I got spare clothes. That's where my phone and batteries and stuff is. I had a bag for my camera. I always have the rain gear easy to access. They're easy in my frame bag. I had food in my like fork bags. Then I put some more food back in the rear of the bicycle. Always have snacks close by. I like these little top tube bags that you can put snacks in. And like most of the time, I just have like a bag of gummy worms in there, and I just sort of snack on those throughout the day. Don't tell the dentist. But there's all sorts of different brands that you can use. They all work typically really well. I like the Ortlieb bags. They're very rainproof. And then for the actual soft bags on the bike, I've used Revlate Designs, Nuclear Sunrise Stitchworks, but there's plenty of others, and they're all very similar. For water, depending on where your trip, either two bottles or a 2 liter hydration bladder. I don't think I've ever ridden anywhere where I felt like I needed more than 2 liters of water just because there's like so much water in the country. The Westfjords bike, since I was in a more open area, or I should say more civilized area, needed a lot less stuff. And so um, I had a small tarp tent, which is basically like a tarp with like a net liner, sleeping bag, pillow, all that fit in a seat bag. Had my spot GPS back there. I had a sleeping pad underneath my the bottom tube on my bike. Spare all my clothes were in this like front bag with my rainproof jacket and pants and tools and stuff in here, and then a bag for the camera again, and then phone and GPS and stuff up front. Um, for like Westfjords, I had a maximum about like 5,000 calories a day. For the Highlands, of course, there's like multiple days, so you got to do your math like how many calories you need, but um, it's gonna be a lot more. On the Westfjords trip, I actually took a Camelback just to hold things like sunscreen and like little things. I didn't actually use the Camelback for water though, because there was just I had the bladder in there, just never used it because there was so much water. So, things to look forward to in 2026. There's a number of races in Westfjords. Tyler, who runs Cycling Westfjords, he's got this multi-day stage race, fully supported. That's in June. Lauf, which is an Icelandic bike brand, they put on a gravel race called the Rift, and then they're doing this stage mountain bike race in northern Iceland, and those are happening in July and August. And then there's this Cuckoo Iceland race. I don't know much about it. I just saw it's like brand new. It's supposed to happen in sort of like southern Iceland in June. Um, should be interesting. All of that area is very pretty. So we'll see how it goes. Other routes. So I've just really talked about the stuff I did, but there's a lot of other routes in Iceland. Historically, the ring road has been quite popular, and so people spend 2 weeks or so just biking around Iceland on this. I'll say though that in the last 5 years or so, the tourism has just skyrocketed, and there's a lot of people driving on these roads. And some of the tourists are coming from areas they don't normally drive, and they're not very experienced. And so I found myself just questioning how safe it is to drive or bike a lot of areas of the ring road. So I don't know if I would recommend that, but if you're an experienced road cyclist, I'm sure it'll be fine. You don't really hear about people getting hit very often. In Westfjords, there was one pair of people that got hit in a tunnel. They didn't have lights and they were wearing black clothing. So that was probably biker error. But people seem to pay attention to cyclists. The Icelanders certainly know to look out for everyone. And the southern coast would be the busiest. And so yeah, that's the place you'd have to watch out the most for. The other place that a lot of people do is the Snæfellsnes Peninsula. That's about a 1 week trip. There will be tourist traffic on there because it's sort of like Iceland in a nutshell, but it's very pretty. There's less traffic than the south coast. And one of these days I want to do this. And so that's on my to-do list. So that's what I got. I think I went a little long, so I apologize, but Iceland just provides a lot of stories and things to talk about. There's a lot of options in cycling in Iceland. It doesn't matter whether you're a super experienced cyclist or not. If you're just vacationing in Iceland, rent a bike for a day and just ride around town and in the capital and see it from a different lens. There's supported or unsupported trips that are possible. It's all just dependent on what your wallet supports. The more support you need, the more money it's going to be. And so I know the Cycling Westfjords guys, when I was living there, they actually had it was a group from India come in and they paid the guy a week to basically travel in a van behind them to support their ride, which was pretty amazing. Cycling slows down your tourism. It gives you more opportunities to interact with people and see nature, which I think is just an amazing way to see a place. You just make sure you put flexibility in your schedule, like put a bonus day in here or there, just to allow for random stops and for where the weather's going to provide. And I thought one of the funniest things to happen was, after I biked West Fjords, I went back to the capital and then I biked around the capital because I apparently didn't bike enough. I stopped by a brewery because that's what I do. And then this guy next to me, that's actually Tyler, who runs the Cycling Westfjords group now. And so he walks in. I'm like, you look familiar. I think, aren't you the guy that helped design this route in Westfjords? He said, yeah. He's like, what were you cycling up there for? The weather was horrible. We went to Switzerland to bike, and that's what Europeans do is they just ride wherever the weather's nice. But it was funny to be in this country that seems large, was actually quite small, and you just run into people and stories are made. And so it's breathtaking. It's challenging. Like I promise you, if you bike in Iceland, you're going to get your butt kicked at some point if you're doing like these multi-day rides, but you're going to come away stronger for it. It's extremely friendly. The people in the rural areas and the rangers and stuff, they're all incredibly curious about what stupid adventures the cyclists are up to. We commonly had comments like, "Oh, don't go there. That's not a good idea, but you do you." And Iceland can be expensive, but you know what? If you cycle and you camp, it makes it a lot cheaper, and so it can kind of bring down the barrier. So with that, I'll stop and I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a couple questions. One from Brian was, would you go single speed again? I think you
Yeah,
answered it.
yeah, I am. So um, the single speeds we used, we actually called it dingle speed, and so we had essentially like we had two rings on the front, two cogs on the back, but there was no way to shift, and so. What we did was actually the taller gear, we only used it on the paved roads at the edge of Iceland. In the highlands, pretty much the entire way was so rough that we were down in like our lower gear. And so essentially what we did was when we transitioned, we just pulled the wheel off, or you run your chain tension or loose, you just flip it over, and then you're essentially single speed. And so yeah, I'm gonna do it again. When I lived in Iceland for 8 months this last year, I all I had was my single speed. And what I found was like if you have to walk up a mountain, you have to walk up a mountain. Like what's interesting is I never got any sort of like saddle sores or any sort of like bike injury from being on the bike too long because you're getting off and hiking once in a while and taking breaks and stuff. So it worked out great.
Okay, we got a question from Morgan. Says, you mentioned renting a bike. I am quite experienced, but do not really want to bring my bike from the US for maybe 3 to 4 total days of biking during a 12 to 15-day trip. I was hoping for a gravel touring bike. I'd be starting in Reykjavik and either making my way back to the city at the end of the day or staying in accommodations. Are there a range of options for rentals?
From what I understand, there are. So I haven't looked into all of the rental options in Reykjavik. I knew they had mountain bikes. I don't know if there's fat bikes, but the gravel bikes are incredibly popular in Iceland. I mean, Lauf was like built for the Iceland roads, and so in Westfjords, that's their primary rental are like gravel touring bikes, which sounds like what you'd be interested in. And so I'd be very surprised if there wasn't that option down in the capital.
Okay, and Chris has a says, what size tires do you have on your Westfjords bike, not the fat bike?
Yeah, so the the Westfjords bike was actually a fat bike, but it had narrower tires on it, and so I was running 3-inch tires. So it's like a plus tire. So it's like in between a mountain bike and a fat bike. That was the only reason I rode that is because it was super comfortable and I thought that would be best for like that one F road. I literally picked those tires for like the worst terrain I would have. It was overkill for most of the West Fjords. And so like the typical tires for the West Fjords would be probably like somewhere between like 40 to 50 millimeters or so, which are like much more reasonable for like gravel bikes.
So for that route or for your commuting in the West Fjords, would just kind of a normal mountain bike or gravel bike work?
Yep, yep. And actually, there's folks that were living in the community that have like road bikes, and they ride road bikes along the paved roads. It's just once you go off the paved road, there's only so many paved roads. And so if you want some variety in your biking, you tend to get the slightly wired tires with the more knobs on them, so you can uh, venture off the paved roads once in a while.
Well, that's true in North Dakota too, isn't
Yeah, no, definitely.
it?
No, I don't even like riding on the roads. I like if it's gravel, I tend to enjoy it more. So I always choose wider. Wider is more comfortable. So
All right. Well, it's been a very thorough and very entertaining presentation, Aaron. We really appreciate it and your thorough preparation and your wonderful photographs as usual. And we hope you'll come back again and wish you all the best of luck on this next big adventure. And hope you have better weather, or at least
yeah,
a series of good weather for most days when you're there.
that's the best part is we'll be there long enough that you're going to have some real horrible weather at some point. So the question is when and how bad. So
So we'll follow up on a couple things you said. Well, one, you talked about Iceland Search and Rescue. So earlier this year, we had a full presentation and webinar with the folks from Iceland Search and Rescue. So I encourage everyone to go check out there. It's really fascinating their history and what they do for everyone in Iceland, and from hikers and visitors to just the local fishermen and just anyone out working in the highlands, like bringing sheep down and everything else. They are critical. So encourage everyone to check that out. And the guest house you mentioned, we actually did a feature with them too, with Hey Iceland, one of our business members, and had a live interview with the folks. I think they've sold it now, but the prior owners of the guest house, and I don't recall the name. You mentioned it earlier, but where you had the nice meal, we actually did a
Hadeler,
feature.
yeah.
Yeah, we did a feature with them for one of our Hey Iceland travel related webinars. So encourage everyone to check those out. Um, and for future events, please check the INLUS website, inlus.org, for our featured events calendar and our community events calendar. And our next webinar will be Tuesday, December 2nd, and we'll have children's author Emil Gretterson, and that will be at 7 p.m. Central Time or 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And hope to see you there. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and thank you for support of Icelandic National League of the United States. And good night.
Thanks for having me.